Welcome back. I'm here talking with Derek Crow with the National Priorities Project about the government shutdown. Derek, when was the last time that the government passed a full budget?
Sad news is it's been a decade. Congress has not done this in 10 years. So you've had not only the massive disaster of what's going on right now, we've had 10 years where Americans have been really denied a regular, open, transparent process where they could get their words in and let people know what they expect their tax dollars to be spent on. And
now let's talk about tracking the actual, tracking the money. How does it become harder to track? We were talking about the resolutions earlier.
So an appropriations process, what you have is, the president will send his proposed budget over, and that gets broken up into the pieces depending on the jurisdiction of the various committees in Congress. The Appropriations Committee has a bunch of subcommittees that, take a look at the pieces under their jurisdiction, like national defense, judicial functions, things like that. And that then gets pulled into a regular committee process. And all along the way, you have hearings, you have some back and forth among members of Congress and their staff, and you've got time as a constituent to be able to weigh in there. Those then get pulled into a bill, the appropriations bills for the 12 different subdivisions of the overall budget, and then that gets brought to the floor. And then at that point, you still have a chance to weigh in. And then after both chambers consider it, then there's a reconciliation process, and at that point, you have a chance to weigh in. And then it gets into the president, and then you can weigh in to the president whether or not you want him to sign those bills. Now, what's happened now, instead of doing all those regular things, we have all these different ways to plug in. Congress just showed up at the end of the year and said, oh, sorry, haven't done my work. Let's just go with what we did last year and sign a paper and try to cram it through at the last minute. If you'd been trying to influence those bills as they went along, you just lost all your work, essentially.
Now, Derek, we've heard stories, the Social Security checks aren't going to get paid, the military is not going to get paid. Is there any truth to that? Should seniors be concerned? Should military servicemen be concerned about the shutdown?
Well, as far as I understand, Social Security checks will still go out. People in the military will still get their checks, but the longer this goes on, the harder each of those functions that remain the harder it is to get those things done. So the Pentagon will have to furlough a bunch of employees, and that will lead to a lot of backup. And if this goes on long enough, that backup could eventually start leaking in and causing it to be harder for those checks to go out. And you've got things like, the CDC not being able to be as responsive to states. You've got things like workplace safety going unsupervised by the federal government. You've got national parks and museums starting to go dark. You've got the EPA will essentially just shut down. So there are all these things that are really important that aren't just what we think of as core military or national security functions that are important to the functioning of this government that are all starting to go dark.
Now, when Harry Reid was on the floor, he said that the Red Rocks National Park would be shut down. Is that a case? I mean, the American people can't go to a national park and enjoy nature because government has been shut down?
That's absolutely correct. It takes staff to provide security and services to folks that go into those things. Right now, they're putting up barricades around the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C.
Putting up barricades?
Yep, so the public can't go in because the staff it takes to administer those sites are not going to be available.
Now, those monuments are made of stone and marble. Do they really need to have government standing around to make sure people don't trip on the stairs?
You might want security guards there. I mean, there's been cases of vandalism against those monuments. There's been, there's folks that need assistance getting up and down the stairs. There are a lot of reasons why why there's security there in the first place, and you don't just want those things to be unattended. And I know it's counterintuitive, right? Because nature is just there. But when you think of a national park, there are all sorts of services that go into keeping some place open, safe, and usable to all Americans. And those things are unfortunately not going to be available during this time.
Well, I think that the trees and the mountains will still be there with or without government, and they'll be there long after government has graced this world. Let me ask you this. How long will this shutdown last?
That is really up to Congress. Now, there's a real danger here. And the danger is that the longer this goes on, it not only affects core government operations, but it starts affecting the economy at large. You've already seen a lot of consumer confidence get shaken. You've seen the markets rattled, but that will get worse. Mark Zandi at Moody's is warning that all sorts of negative economic effects from lack of buying and lack of purchasing, unemployment rates going up. The longer those 800,000 people are being not paid and just idle, that affects the economy and it affects their ability to purchase things. So the longer this goes on, the more damaging it becomes. Now, we hope that Congress will be responsive to people pushing them to kind of put the politics aside for a while and just get our government funded. But the longer that doesn't go on, the worse it is for the economy and for Americans.
Are you seeing any signs of who will compromise first, the president or the House?
You know, it's hard to say. I mean, you would have to probably direct your questions to them for that. But I do know that it's essential that they get in a room and they absolutely have to start listening to their constituents who need a transparent process that lets us weigh in.
Derek, let's talk about the National Priorities Project. What are you guys doing to open up government transparency during this shutdown?
Well, right now we're working with a couple of groups, the Center for Effective Government and Sunlight Foundation, as well as a couple other groups, to try to open up the appropriations process. We're writing joint letters. We're trying to get in touch with the elected representatives, but we're also educating people about this so that they can get in touch with their elected representatives and really speak their minds about the situation. You know, we just put out a video called "The 4 Things Government Did that Congress Did Instead of Passing a Budget." It's on our webpage at nationalpriorities.org. And yesterday we were encouraging folks just to drop it on the web pages of their elected officials to let them know that you know what Congress has been up to and you expect them to actually get their job done.
All right, that was Derek Crow of nationalpriorities.org. Stay tuned to WHDT World News. We still have the rest of today's headlines. We've also got a full report on the weather coming up. We'll be right back.